you very much for inviting me, for having me over from Germany, for the heart.
And welcome to the big debate. The question is, deqi or not deqi? Well, is that a question? Well, it is for this afternoon. And as in the famous words of Mrs. Martin, who used to appear on the telly many years ago, I think we may have a heated debate. For me, deqi was something that came quite late, almost 6 years really, into my practice. When I first studied acupuncture, I was told about deqi. This was in 1978 when I first studied acupuncture, so quite some time ago. And if I got a reaction when I needled, this was considered fine. I got the thumbs up from my clinical teachers, but it wasn't necessarily seen as essential. It was just a bonus that I had. Then, 6 years later, when I first went to China, well, 5 years later, in 1986, it became quite clear from all the teachers that I came across that if I didn't get deqi, I wasn't really doing anything. So it was essential to get deqi. And I watched some of these masters practicing their art and their skill. And I had to think, as I watched this, what actually was happening here. Because some of it was very fancy, some of it was done with a great deal of aplomb and finesse, but quite a lot of it was done as performance. For me, there was absolutely no doubt there was an aspect of performance art in some of this ritual. And of course, when I came back to England and practiced with my own patients, I felt, because it had been really drummed into me, I had to obtain deqi. My needling technique became more vigorous, and I nearly, on every occasion, on every point that I needled, tried to obtain deqi. But I did question this process. Obviously, the thicker the needle you use, the more deqi you probably can elicit. But if you use very fine needles, perhaps somebody feels nothing. Now, does that mean nothing happens? So we have to ask ourselves, what is happening here? What is the concept of deqi all about? Is it something real? Does it measure qi? Who is it for? Is it for me, the practitioner? Do I need to know that I am doing something that is effective? And does my patient need to know that something is happening, that some potency, some aspect of something being done to me is something I can feel? So it became clear to me that perhaps this notion of deqi was important for both of us. We both needed it in order to establish the potency of acupuncture itself and the legitimacy of the whole process. And maybe locked into all of that was, if I obtained deqi, the therapeutic effect would be better, because I had that drummed into me when I was in China. If I got deqi, the therapeutic effect would be better. But it still leaves me questioning what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. I don't know for whom or for why. Not really, if I think about it. And I find myself caught in patterns and rituals, and I confer meaning on them, and my patients confer meaning on them. But I'd like to know if I'm talking about something of substance, something of intention, something of potency, and something that confers legitimacy. And I would like to ask the speakers here assembled. We have Jennie Longbottom, physiotherapist, member of the BACC, who teaches on an MSc in pain management. Charlie Buck here, who is a herbalist, an acupuncturist, and an international lecturer. Volker, who has now become, bless him, Professor of East Asian Medicine at Westminster University. We must give a round of applause for this, because he will be and is a great ambassador for the skills and arts that we practice. And Tim Newman, who is a zero balancer, an acupuncturist, a therapeutic masseur, but also interested, I think, in the relationship of art and medicine and sensory experience. Each of us, I think, probably practices very differently. We've come with very different mindsets, no doubt, to the art and practice and science of acupuncture. But we all have, no doubt, a different take on deqi. So I'd like perhaps to start with asking each of our principal speakers here what they think deqi is and for whom it is important. Who would like to start? Ladies first. Oh, Jennie. Ladies first. Come on.
I'm no lady. I don't know is the answer. I wish I did know, and I wish I did know even more now because I'm spending all of my time in PhD research trying to find out an answer. If I could just take you back a little bit into my training, which was physiotherapy first, acupuncture second, and my acupuncture training was very Western to start with. At that time, I didn't believe in deqi, I didn't believe in qi because it didn't fit into my medical paradigm. As I progressed with acupuncture, I started to realise that there's some sort of therapeutic alliance. There's something more than sticking the needle in the skin, which is basically what I was taught. So I went away and did a TCM course, a long one in China and then an MSc. And now I do believe in deqi, and I do believe in qi. But I believe it's a multifactorial thing. It's a therapeutic alliance, it's a mechanical movement of tissue, and in my case I believe that may be fascia. And you've all got to come and listen to me tomorrow, because I'll show you why. But it's also my expectation of my level of expertise, which I pass on to a patient. Whether that's an aching, numbness, deep, whatever, or whether it's when I know that I'm treating a patient properly, I think that's much more likely. I do think in the next 5 years we may be able to find something to measure and something to show the world. Whether that makes your treatment better, I don't think it will. So that's where I come.
I hope you'll let me just tell a short story. When I was an acupuncture student, really it was all about the beautiful philosophy. It was about the stems and branches and the beautiful super DPO philosophy. And the needling was almost a perfunctory endpoint. It was the kind of thing you had to do because you were an acupuncturist. The patient would lie there, you'd take the pulses, you'd stick the needles in, but it was really about for the practitioner's experience of the beauty of it all. So that's how I kind of started my practice, except that TCM started to come in. We started to get more contact with China, and there was this mysterious deqi thing, the way the Chinese people do it. And I started in practice, and a friend of mine grabbed a Chinese doctor, acupuncturist, off the plane from China in the communist era, and we got hold of an interpreter, and we dragged her straight from Manchester Airport to my friend's house in Didsbury in Manchester, and sat her down. She had got greasy, lank hair and a fringe and a blue suit, and a grubby blue suit, and we said, we were very, very respectful, and we had this beautiful image of ourselves as practitioners, and we said, show us your acupuncture technique. And so we gave her a needle, she stabbed it into the sofa and started macerating the inside of the sofa, and we were kind of, oh my God, what's that? And I said to her, one of my questions was, well, do you think the practitioner's qi has got anything to do with this, or is it just the patient's qi, or where does qi come into this? And she first pretended she couldn't understand the question, because that's the Chinese way. If you're embarrassed, you pretend not to understand the question. And then she said, no, you just stick it. It's like sticking a needle into a piece of meat. Shake it around a bit. Now, the funny thing was that 2 or 3 years later, she offered a seminar in London on needle technique. And she was still in the country. She stayed in the country, and she was now beautifully coiffured, lovely hairdo. I won't say her name because she's probably still here. Very nice lady. And she gave a seminar on needle technique. And now she was completely different. She was doing needle practice on a Chinese sanitary towel. She was claiming to get deqi from a Chinese sanitary towel. And it was very much qigong breathing, and it was a different story altogether. She'd adapted to Western things. So I went to China. I thought I must get this needle technique thing going, dragon eye, phoenix eye, and all this. In fact, rubber band exercises like bull worker to get those muscles up. In fact, I employed a Chinese doctor for some years, and the first thing she did when she came to our clinic was feel our first interosseous muscle. You're not good. No, you need big muscle here. Actually, mine was okay. I passed. But then I went to China and saw these 2-inch 26 gauge nails, roofer's nails, being inserted into people and wellied away. So I came back to this country practicing that way, and I didn't get better results, to be honest. I think I got better results on some people. So I thought about this for years and years and years, and the conclusion, to cut a long story short, is that it's the same as with herbs. There's a saying in herbal medicine, the dosage is the question that can't be taught. That you can't teach what the correct dosage for any person is. It's an instinctive thing that you get by practice and by years. And I think it's exactly the same with acupuncture, that actually anybody who walks through the door on a particular day with a particular condition needs a different form of stimulation, needs a different level of stimulation. And the magic of our profession, I think, is being able to somehow divine what the correct stimulation is. So I think that the research that's coming out in acupuncture now shows that you can get results with minimal needling, with hardly any welly, as it's called, or welly. You can still get a response, but some people need heavy stimulation, and that's the magic, I think, of the whole thing. That actually an acupuncturist is not a person who's bought a set of needles and sticks them into people. An acupuncturist is a person who's an expert in stimulation. A person, we should be the best lovers in the world, because we should be expert in knowing how to stimulate for particular effect. I won't pursue that line any further for now. But really, my view is that deqi is a whole spectrum, a whole range of possibilities. And that's the mistake of the Westerner somehow, is that the Westerner just sees one section of a continuum and thinks, well, that's the correct section, or that's the correct section. But we've seen this in feng shui. I'm sorry if I'm going on, I'll finish in a moment. In feng shui, we've got feng shui is don't build your house on the major bend of a major river. Don't put your bed under a big roof timber at one end of the spectrum. The other, put a red bucket in your love corner and love will come. And so there's this whole spectrum from the most esoteric to the most down-to-earth and practical. And to my view, the Chinese mind has that whole spectrum, because then they won't miss anything. And it's the same with acupuncture. We have to have that whole spectrum of deqi. So deqi is minimal, touching people with a feather, through to roofer's nails all the way along the Jiaji points. That's my view.
What colour was that bucket?
The red bucket for your love corner. Get a red bucket, put it in your love corner.
There's a lot of potency imagery in this so far.
I can make it short and say I agree with most of them. Which I do. Yeah. Although I think it raises lots of questions, because as an individual, how do you, judging from my own practice, I mean, if you want to be good at something, you also have to train at it. Mm. So you train at one thing, you cannot train at the other thing. So how do you become good at being very, like minimal, and also become very good at something else, like projecting the qi a lot.
Yeah.
Everything takes such a
Yes,
long
technique,
time.
yeah.
So I think that raises a really big question because, in training, I mean, it has taken me 30 years to become a little bit good at one thing, maybe in acupuncture. So how can I also become good at all the other things, like projecting? I'm not good at projecting stuff along the
I'll
channel.
show you how to do that.
Yeah, but no, just as an example, I think that raises one question. How do we become good at all these different things? And then I can only share from my own experience. I put a lot of effort in studying herbal medicine in a certain way. And I spent probably all my reading in Chinese medicine, 98% has been on herbal medicine, I would say. I really know my way around the history of herbal medicine and what different people think. Acupuncture, I don't. I've really basically learned just by reading one book, the Nanjing, and by practicing, and by really trusting almost. And I mean, there are reasons for that. I don't have to go into that; it's too boring. But there are reasons for that. So I basically just trusted what was in the book, and then I went along with it. And I experimented quite a bit like you maybe. Should I needle very strongly? Should I not needle very strongly? What is important? Is it how you needle? Is it whether you breathe in or out or blah 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 blah? In the end, my feeling, at least for myself, what is important is what point I choose. What is to me personally not so important is what I do. As long as I get the point, I think there I would have to make a really 100% statement that if I get, I use very few points. So I use often only 1 or 2 or 3 points maximum in treatment, very often 2. Also for very acute things. And I would say, it's really important what point I choose. I've tried to do, leave it in, take it out, leave it in for 20 minutes, leave it in for 5 minutes, make the patient feel it. I'm not maybe so sensitive and all the different things that I have developed a technique of what I feel. But that's what I would say. The point is crucial. The rest for me, personally. But that's just my personal experience with all these other limitations because I didn't try all the rest. Yes, and I think other people will have different experience. So that's what my acupuncture experience is.
But then there are acupuncturists, sorry to interrupt, there are acupuncturists in China who specialise in one point, in treating everything from one point. There's Dr. Stomach 9 who will just
I studied with
and treat everything.
I studied with Dr. Tai Chi, so he did kidney 3 on everybody, and that was that. So I can only share my own personal experience.
There is also, just spinning off that, Fritz Smith, who is the originator of zero balancing, but he also, that's how we met him in this country, was when he came to Leamington for acupuncture. He was notoriously bad at point location, but he got fantastic pulse changes. I mean, often his point was a centimetre away from where it should have been. So there's a whole thing about the way he connected with the person that made for him the point wasn't so important, but something about the quality of connection was, and that's true for him as it would be true what you said for yourself. Coming from my own experience, before I learnt acupuncture, I was a patient for several years. So my first learning was that I felt the qi, or I felt something. I went, yes! So I knew there was a reality behind getting the point or not getting the point. And if I didn't say yes, then the acupuncturist usually tried again. But every now and then he'd say, no, we got it. And would verify that with the pulses. And then usually I would feel something with a bit of a delay. So I also learned that I shouldn't expect a particular feeling. I shouldn't expect it to be the same intensity left and right side if it was needled both sides. And that helped me a lot when I came to practice. I didn't mind if I felt something or not. Like Jasmine, I didn't feel it. It was not emphasized. And I allowed the person to go yes or or ow or whatever it was. So that was enough. And that's, I mean, I haven't really changed my technique at all, except as a result of being needled by different practitioners over the years, where each one who was different, I thought, oh, that's interesting. I didn't even feel that go in. I didn't even feel that. I didn't, and I'm now being treated by a completely non-Leamington acupuncturist where I basically don't feel anything at all, any of the time, and it's spectacular treatment. And I know that I can feel fantastic things from a tiny little response and quite a big whatever. So I'm in mystery, like Jennie, as well as fascination about where the answers lie. And I agree with what you said, Charles.
And there you have it.
No, I think there's a bit more to it. I'd be quite interested to know, amongst all of you here, is it better to have the microphone? Amongst all of you here, how many of you actually feel it is important to obtain deqi?
As the practitioner?
Well, yes, let's start. As a practitioner, yes, as a practitioner. All right, is that about half of you? How many of you don't think it's important? Possibly as many hands, but you're not sticking them up high enough. Which is interesting in itself. Okay. All right.
Can I interrupt then?
Yes.
In my world, it's not possible to stick a needle into somebody without setting off a physiological reaction. Absolutely. And that's my definition of deqi, is that you've actually triggered some kind of a response. And no matter, even if a mosquito lands, a fly lands on your forehead, you're aware of it. That fly has obtained deqi in a sense, and they've obtained enough deqi to make you hit your head or whatever, or bang it on a rock or something. So it's a question of the definition of deqi. You've got the modern TCM communist version of deqi, and then if you look back at the Neijing, you've got definitions of deqi that involve the clouds and sunlight appearing through clouds, or birds changing direction in the sky, or whatever. So we have to decide whether we're talking about communist deqi or something else. Something else. Oh, sorry, PRC. People, no, we don't have PRC anymore, do we? Textbook. Modern deqi, all right, or any sort of physiological response.
But as a receiver, you can distinguish between a mosquito landing and something which is a sensation, and the specific kind of sensation which you get from an acupuncture needle, which tends to be recognizable. So it's not just any sensation that will do, I don't think.
Along the channel. That's the point.
I mean, physiologically, I disagree with you. Sorry.
Experientially, yes.
Sorry.
There is.
Do you want this, Jennie? No. That's not so.
deqi.
I just got deqi.
Physiologically, if you put a piece of cotton wool on the skin or your hand or the guide tube from an acupuncture needle, you will have a physiological response. That will vary entirely according to the pathology, physiology, homeostasis of the person you're doing that to. It will also vary according to your pathology, physiology, and your intent.
Yes, but I wouldn't call that deqi from my own experience, no. I just call that a sensation or a response. It's different from deqi.
Is there anyone here who'd like to give a definition of deqi, or their understanding of deqi?
Definition of hitting the point exactly. And it's always along the channel, not anything else. If you hit stomach at the 60, he feels it in the hole.
So for you, deqi is locating the point and then having a sensation of propagation along the channel.
Hitting the point exactly.
So what about moxibustion or cupping or gua sha? Do those involve deqi?
When you hit, no, it doesn't have to do with that. And you always get deqi when deqi confirms that you hit the point and you hit the meridian, the channel, or not.
But in a sense, the essence of medicine is having an effect. The essence of medicine is having an effect on somebody and having a deliberate effect, having an effect that you are deciding what you're going to do. And what I'm saying is that my definition of deqi is having a coherent effect, passing information that has a beneficial effect on that person's physiology. And it doesn't necessarily, it can involve swan, sourness, jang, distension or heaviness or whatever. But to my mind, deqi is a broader concept. It's a whole range of things. And it's something about the information in it, that actually we could sit in front of a television screen at night and we could have photons that weigh almost nothing hit our retinas. We could have sound vibrate our ears, and we could drop everything and fly to Africa, to Zaire or somewhere, and go and dig wells.
Yep.
It could have a profound effect because of the information content in a tiny amount of energy that dramatically changes that person's life. And I'm saying that, in a sense, that's my idea of deqi. My sense of deqi is that it's anything that has the power to beneficially change a person's qi and their physiology.
All concepts are about definition.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your concept is now becoming so broad.
Yeah,
that
I'm
it's
cheating.
becoming unusable.
Yeah.
I'm
It's not about
sorry.
what is true or what is
No.
to me. It's not
No.
about what is true or what is not
Yeah.
true.
Yeah.
It's about you need to define concepts and then you work with them.
Yeah.
And the validity for me of the concept is really only how does it help you to work with something. So your concept at the moment,
It's too broad.
although it might be philosophically cool, but it's unworkable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think if I think the only thing that why this discussion might be useful as a tool to help us think about it. And then, of course, we want to think about why would we want to think about it. We might want to think about it as individuals, like how do I have to develop my own practice, or we might want to think about it collectively, like if you do research. If you do research, then you have to define something. Otherwise, you say, I'm doing research on deqi, but you haven't defined it.
I agree
Does that
entirely.
make sense? Yeah?
I've pushed the definition too far, in a sense,
It has to be,
deliberately.
like your definition, I think, is also, to me at least. I mean, if I would do what I would normally do, then I think the first starting point would have to be, starting with the Chinese, what do they say about it? Yes, and then of course later on there's the Japanese and the Koreans as well, and then afterwards we come. Yeah. Okay, but the first point for me, and I don't know anybody might have done that here, is textual research. We have to start with what do these people say, and as I say, I haven't read too much about it, but I'm sure even modern textbooks wouldn't go along with your definition, because I don't think you need to have propagation of sensation along the channel for that to be defined as deqi. Deqi is more like a sensation, isn't it? Yes. So I think your definition is too narrow. Does that make sense? If you want to have a definition, but it's just about finding a definition. First of all, if you want to talk about it, let's come up with some kind of definition, and why we want to have that definition and not another one. That's what I would suggest. Yeah? Because otherwise we're talking just talking.
Yeah.
Is it possible to find out? Where this deqi concept comes from? Where is it?
It's always like these people write, and like you have in the Nanjing, you have a discussion about you say what is important is not the right hand but the left hand. So it's not what the patient feels, and the Japanese go on about this. It's not what the patient feels, but what you feel. If it's soft, is the qi coming? And when the qi is coming, then you put the needle in. So that's one definition that I'm familiar with. But as I said, I haven't read almost nothing. But I know from my familiarity with Chinese medical literature that I'm sure there's loads and loads and loads of stuff out there related, talking about feelings, relating it to feng shui. Yeah, okay, I'm 100% sure about that. Yeah, these kind of things, they will be out there. So that would have to be for me a starting point. But I can't do that here.
For me, one of the interesting things is the relationship between deqi and consciousness. And sort of Volker sort of touched on that. Many people I've spoken to in China and Japan, they do divide this. Is it the practitioner's consciousness, or is it the patient's consciousness? And on a therapeutic level, I think sometimes we are healed by things we're not conscious of. And a good example is you go for a walk in the forest or something, and your sort of worries won't drift away, but you're not made conscious of that. Whereas if you have a massage or whatever, there's a kind of conscious connection to it. So when you do something, when you're asking, is deqi important? So, I mean, maybe the healing for that person is best if it's not too conscious. And then other people like a conscious feeling. As you touched on with the idea of they need to feel that they've got their money's worth. Now I've come for an acupuncturist, I want to feel that. And then if you're TCM or 5 elements or gentle, so usually I have to warn people, or certainly when I came back from China, I said, have you had acupuncture before? Yes. Who did you see? What was it like? Because usually when you come back from China, you're going to be sort of a motorhead of needling, don't you? So come back and make it really strong.
Can I give you a case history?
Sure.
It's because I don't... So, okay, it's somebody I treat for herbal medicine, and he's very skeptical about anything. He's a young person, and so he comes for acne, and then he had an injury in his back. He plays cricket, so I said, well, do you want... He just put his back out, so I said, do you want me to try and help you with it? I can stick a few needles, just see whether it works or not, yeah? And he... he said, okay, you can do it, but obviously he really didn't believe that this would do anything. And I just used the point on his hand and the point on his leg, not there, not in the back, anything. He doesn't feel anything. And for him it was, he would have liked, if anything, that I stick some needles in his back and that I make it hurt. And he got totally the opposite. He went out of the room and think this can obviously not work. Yeah, and he didn't expect anything. And the next time he came, oh, this is kind of like very strange. So therefore, do you understand? Like when you say, oh, we need to give the patient what they want. Obviously, I didn't give him at all what he wanted.
I didn't mean that, but I mean, even what is the idea of what is deqi? For me, the definition is deqi that it's related to consciousness, and it doesn't say anything about what is the best therapeutic effect. I mean, rather than just a biological stimulation, either the practitioner feels they're doing something, or they don't. And the patient feels something, or they don't. And I think for Chinese medicine, because we have this idea of pain is a lot.
Okay, let me push you on this then. Yeah. I didn't feel anything on the needle. What I felt was a pulse.
Yeah.
That's what I chose where I put the needles. But you cannot then call the pulse taking deqi. I mean, we can call it deqi, but then we are where we were before. So do you know what I mean? It's kind of like I really want to, very honest, I didn't feel anything on the needles, he didn't feel anything. So according to our definition, there's no deqi, is there? Okay, yet he gets, very quickly, gets better, very clearly with one treatment. So, and I feel it only on the pulse. So, do you understand? Like maybe there are other things going on, but it depends on how we want to. What is the deqi here?
Could I ask? You say you've been treating him for some time.
No, but with herbs for acne.
But how long?
Quite a long time.
So he has a therapeutic alliance with you. He trusts you already.
No, sure, there are loads of other things going on, but we're talking about deqi. Does that make sense? I mean, I want to come, when we talk about deqi, I want us to operate with the concept, what we mean by it, because otherwise we can go off into therapeutic relationships and consciousness and touch. And does that make sense? Yes? Because if we want to talk about deqi, let's talk about something that let's come up with a definition
and as far as
that
we
can talk about.
We're talking about a sensation that either the practitioner or the patient or both feel at the moment of needling when the point is got. Is that fair?
No, I think.
Well, I think it can be either.
We have to talk with someone we can all agree upon.
Okay.
Yeah? So yours.
So, so it's very clear. I don't feel it as the practitioner. I wasn't taught that I needed to feel it. So my attention is in positioning, and the person breathing in, inserting the needle, waiting for them to feel it, and then that was how I was taught. It worked for me, on me, and so I've got no problem with that. So for me, that deqi is something that the patient feels, and if I don't get the point, they go, you didn't get it. And so mostly I'm guided by them affirming, especially once they've felt 1 or 2 needles, they know, and in fact they're disappointed if it doesn't happen. And this was most evident to me. I didn't practice acupuncture very much for a long time because of getting into zero balancing. And then I worked in a clinic in London with mainly people from abroad who had a very strong belief in acupuncture as being efficient, from Persia, from Africa. For them, there's no doubt, acupuncture is one of the most wonderful treatments. And they loved feeling that sensation. They went, that was a good one. And so they were just delighted. I didn't feel anything. But I feel that they were feeling their side of deqi, whereas it could have been that I could feel deqi, but I've just given it no attention.
Danny?
Last year at this conference, Elizabeth Scheid gave quite an interesting seminar about, and it relates to this, and what she was saying was that traditional medicines all over the world generally have there's a moment, whether it's giving someone something to make them vomit, or causing pain, but there's a moment when the practitioner, the patient, become present together at exactly the same moment, and that it didn't matter what the stimulus was, but in her view that healing happened when the two of them and whatever the stimulus was were at that moment together at the same time. So in terms of, I find it very difficult to let go of that sensation, despite the fact that my patients don't like it. And I think that perhaps, although maybe that it doesn't have the physiological importance isn't there, that focus is one aspect of to deqi or not to deqi. And for me, that's important, the focus. Whichever point, that they feel something and we're together at that moment, it made a lot of sense, because no matter which medicines you look at, there's always some kind of prodding or stimulus to get you both there together.
1,000 times I've treated a patient a few times, in a course of treatment and got nowhere, and then suddenly changed my stimulation, made it, for example, very much stronger, and then it suddenly worked. And I've also had the reverse, where I've done quite strong treatments and it hasn't really suited that person, and then I've done very weak acupuncture and that suited them. And that's what's baffled me over the years. That's what's led me to the view that there's a spectrum of stimulation. I've treated people with no stimulation at all, with minimal stimulation, and have dramatic results. And I've also treated people with minimal stimulation and had nothing happen apparently, and then given them welly, and it's had a dramatic effect. The only conclusion I can draw is that there is an appropriate level of stimulation for any person at any time with any condition. And for me, that's all deqi. It's still deqi because it had an effect. If it has an effect, for me, it's deqi, and it's just the appropriateness. And for me, part of the understanding about Shen and a practitioner's Shen is that Shen is to do with knowing what is appropriate, and having a very clear Shen is being especially good at being able to divine what's appropriate for any person.
But doesn't this idea of the wimpification of therapies come in here as well?
What? Sorry.
Wimpification.
Actually, yeah, we don't want to hurt our patients because we want them to come back to us. And people don't expect to get blisters from moxa. People don't expect to take herbs that make them vomit. People don't expect to be bled. And that actually, there's a question there for me about, am I shying away from what a patient needs?
I don't know whether you're right about what patients want. I mean, we took on this Chinese doctor 7 years ago, and if we went into her treatment room at lunchtime, it was like a horror movie, because there was, paper towels soaked in blood and cups and, all sorts of implements all over the place. If you took a camera around there, it would be a panorama program. And those patients liked that. So, a lot of them were my patients that we passed on, and they wanted more of it. When she finally left and I took those patients back, they wanted abuse.
Well, on one level, we challenge the body, right? I don't think this is all the same stuff, but I think one method of healing is really to challenge the body, whether it's with acupuncture or herbs, and that the body has to deal with that and mobilises its...
To challenge or to coax.
Yes, I would disagree with challenging. I would say that we are facilitating homeostasis, the restoration of health, rather than challenging that body. That body's already been challenged. That's why they're coming to us. And I work in really quite severe pain. I do, and my patients are. And to get very strong deqi for some of those patients would immediately result in them not returning. Very good outcome measurements, but they don't return. So I've had to adapt my physiology to that patient's requirements.
I agree, not in all cases, but I think
No.
there's one aspect of Chinese medicine traditionally that does have that kind of gung-ho, kill or cure, like there is in a lot of shamanic medicines as well.
And Western medicine.
And Western medicine.
Yeah. We used to do something called counter-irritation, where you actually burned patients to take their mind off the pain that they already have. So, we've moved on a little, but not a lot.
Do all of you or some of you... Sorry.
Janice.
Oh, Janice, sorry, Janice.
Hi, I just wanted to pick up on something Danny said, which reminded me, some of you will know of Julia Measures, who lectured for a long time in Leamington. And so, I think she wrote an article about this, about the third presence, that two people together, call it rapport, links of it to Danny's comment, creates a third. And I've often thought about that in my own consultation, that it's in that third presence, in that sort of embodiment, if you like, that actually both practitioner and patient kind of tap in, and that creates a certain charge. I know we're talking of the subtlety of this qi debate, but I've held on to that as a very powerful image, and I just feel that that third presence somehow is where something energetic is evolved for that moment between the practitioner and the patient, and then of course it's gone once the session is over. Just throw that into the equation. Thank you.
I was going to ask, we often hear, and I think for me it's true, I think over the years, is that you eventually attract the patients you can best treat. Would some of you agree with that? Would some of you disagree with that? All right, if in fact you do attract the patients eventually that you can best treat, does that say anything about how you, about the notion of deqi and the kind of where on the spectrum you decide to operate? If you are somebody that finds it very difficult to give welly to the needling and inflict what seems like obvious, deeply felt sensations on behalf of the patient, and that's something you don't like, then perhaps you will not attract patients who want that kind of stimulation, and therefore you may in fact attract different kinds of patients that will suit what it is you're capable of giving. Does that equate with anybody in terms of how they feel about deqi?
No.
Right.
I'm just thinking back over my experience. I agree with what Janice just said about the third presence, but for me, because of my experience as a receiver, I knew there was something that happened when I felt that sensation. So as a practitioner, it does matter to me to get that. It's not that it's just going to happen anyway because we've got a nice rapport. It's like, yes, I want that, and so does the patient. And I had someone who was totally needle phobic, hated needles, had to kind of really build up, but she knew that her response when she had acupuncture was so good that we just took our time.
Not me.
Some musical... and so... So even with someone who didn't like it and was challenged, because of that recognition, I would say this is true of most people, the level of discomfort is acceptable if you have a condition that you feel you trust the person doing it, you know they're not doing it to hurt you, it just goes along with the territory. And so in terms of this debate, that a sensation of there being something real to it, I think is important. Actually keeps us both.
You say for yourself? Or for
no, for either. One of us, there has to be a sense.
But you mean like for you and your patients, or
yes.
for a general statement?
I'm saying this for me, as a practitioner, one of us has to feel it, and in my case, because of the way I was taught, and because of my experience before being a practitioner of feeling it, that was enough. So that I felt...
I would say I've had enough experience of neither me feeling something, nor the patient feeling something, and still the patient getting better.
Yes.
So that's what I would say. So we can either arrive at everybody does, according to Charlie, everybody does what is okay for them at that moment in time, and if it works, it works. You know, or... Did you know what I mean? Like in terms of having a debate, or in terms of taking that further, you say one thing. I think a debate works by people. Yes. You know, so you're saying either the patient has to feel something, or you have to feel something, and then you get an effect.
That I don't want to actually link it with the effect. I'm just saying that the importance of feeling something. I feel it is important to feel something, but I know that it's also possible to not feel something. But then we're not talking about deqi at that moment, as far as I understand it, because deqi is a sensation. So where you feel nothing, there's a different dynamic operating, which is neither better nor worse than what we're referring to as deqi. It just means that sometimes there is deqi as a sensation, sometimes there isn't. So I'm happy with there being no sensation in an interaction, as well as some sensation.
So that would mean for clinical effectiveness, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter, and that's where we get called wishy-washy by researchers. Of course it matters. It's a variable.
It's one of many
variables. And that's why they have such a hard time measuring something which clearly is real and has an effect, because it varies so much they can't standardise. And it's one of my passions which I'm working on at the moment.
Nick? Well, there's lots of hands up, actually. Okay.
My question is, I'm interested in the people who said in the room that they didn't believe in deqi, and just look, in a way, the panel's getting some consensus up there. It'd be quite nice to get a debate from people who were maybe a third of the people in the room who don't agree about deqi.
Can you rephrase that? Because I don't think anyone said that deqi wasn't important. I think they said it didn't matter whether they felt it, which is different.
Well, I think they didn't say. I think again we have to be clear. Yes? It's not about whether you feel deqi, because like say if I feel the pulse, of course I'm feeling deqi. When we talk about deqi, I think what we're talking about is whether you feel something when you put the needle in. It's not talking about deqi, like I can feel the deqi when I touch the person, or when I feel the deqi along the meridian. I'm still working with deqi. I'm not saying that I'm not working with deqi. And that's different than deqi we're talking about when we stick the needle in, isn't it? Yeah? Okay, is that?
Yes.
Yeah, can we agree on that? Yeah? Well, it has got something to do with sticking the needle in and feeling something, not about feeling deqi.
Yes. It's propagated sensational language.
Whatever. Yeah. Okay.
Better than deqi.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I give a different version of deqi and let everybody have a little bit more understanding of that? Okay, and a chance version. First, the dog itself, to me, is a past tense. It means that you got it. Okay, that's dog. It means that before you get it, you cannot use dog. So qi itself also implies life as well. But deqi itself not only apply acupuncture, also apply to day-to-day life. If we get something done, get it very nicely, we can go deqi. So in a narrow sense, I think we apply to acupuncture or needling, that you feel something there, you got deqi. But also get a broad sense. The broad sense is the purpose served. Where purpose served in that you want to treat something, not necessarily feeling something there. But if you want to treat that person healed by what you do, you also deqi. So that's a broad sense of it, a narrow sense of it. And also that's a past tense, you must got it. That purpose already served. To me, that's deqi.
Yes, I don't know your name, sorry, at the back there.
I think I best agree with Charlie, actually, of the whole panel. I've been treating for about 15 years now, and I think initially I always tried to achieve a strong sensation, but I think probably in the last 3 or 4 years my needle techniques refined, and I can think of a number of patients who I treat who actually don't get any sensation when I needle them at all, and yet I still get a result from doing that. And in my experience, they're generally the people who probably have the weakest of energy, and as Charlie was saying, it's a whole spectrum of what do people need. Some people need that strong needling, and some people need a much gentler way. And I think it's taken me a little while to develop the confidence to believe that will have an effect without the sensation. Probably for myself, when I have treatment, I expect to from looking at it from the patient side, I actually like to feel some sensation personally, because that's something that I'm used to feeling. But I don't think it's necessary to. That's my experience.
Alison?
I don't know how other people feel about this, but for me, it always feels as though you come together with the patient, and there's some kind of thing that goes on, and you're assessing the level of their chi, and sort of then aligning yourself with that. So you move from one position, both in an individual treatment and over a course of treatment. So I feel as though there's a matching that goes on. Now, if that patient is very deficient, you may be deciding, it's a dosage thing. So you decide to actually needle very gently, because you're just beginning the process. And they may feel nothing, but you might. And then there's a sort of coming together over a period of time where they may be feeling more, because actually their chi is going up. But there's still been some concept of the chi in the sense of either you know or they know. And to begin with, it's really, I feel like it's the practitioner that's taking that lead. And sometimes, as Volker was saying, you may only feel that on the pulse. You may not feel that much, they may not feel that much, but you know something has happened. But it's a kind of gradual melding and transformation that goes on over a period of time. So there's still the chi in a sense, but maybe not quite the definition. I don't know if other people see it that way.
Yes, you've got
I find it quite frustrating, the idea of the chi. It's all very lovely, but it sounds a bit like magic to me when we talk about things like that. I think we all agree we diagnose, and then obviously some people who are deficient need a gentler technique, and some people who have got more of an excessive condition probably need a bit more of an excessive technique. But it still doesn't really explain to me what the chi is, and what it means to in the treatment, and what it doesn't. I feel no clear on it at all. It's like this magical concept that I have no idea about.
But do you try to obtain deqi when you work?
No, I don't know. I don't know what deqi is. I don't know what it is. I think the explanation the gentleman over there gave was very good. I thought it was very good, very clarifying. But I still, in terms of my practice, I kind of just work on diagnosis. I think the idea that if they need reduction needling technique, and I would do that, whether or not it's to actually achieve deqi, which I don't really want to know if it is.
You must have had acupuncture, though.
I have, and I can feel different things, but I don't know if that's deqi. Well, I don't. It doesn't
One
explain.
form of deqi.
Well, they're all different. You can feel tingling. You can feel. Sometimes it feels warm. Sometimes it feels achy. Sometimes it. There's no.
There are names for each of those.
there's no-
Each of those types of deqi has got a specific name in acupuncture.
But okay, but I don't know. I don't think it's not the same at each treatment. It's not the same for each person. Sometimes I don't know. I feel a bit kind of like out in the open sea.
Here's an interesting question. Could we do? I sometimes thought, how can I do acupuncture more swiftly and more conveniently? And I'm wondering whether if I take a staple gun and do acupuncture with a staple gun, is that going to be as good as using a traditional needle? Do you think we can do acupuncture with a staple gun?
That has been invented.
It has been invented, has it? Oh, like a spring loader thing, with boing. Yeah, but then you still hold the needle and kind of twiddle it, don't you? You use that for insertion, and then you go and twiddle it around a bit. I'm just wondering whether you can do acupuncture just without using any hand technique. Blow pipe. I'm thinking staple gun.
Actually, Mike, can I just...
Go on.
But I think something important came up in what you said to me.
Sorry.
Because I think you cannot, again, also take the whole deqi away from things like needle technique, you know? So it's not just about a sensation. It's also what you do and all that kind of stuff, you know? So I think, I mean, I didn't set up this debate, but I mean, I also personally at this moment don't understand yet the purpose, yes, okay? Because, well, I don't. I just can. I would like, if we want to go somewhere, then we need to make definitions and we need to set goals, because otherwise we're just talking. And then we're talking for an hour and a half, and maybe it's good. And talking can also be good. It's a coming together. It's a kind of deqi. Yeah. Okay. You can also say, yeah. Okay. But if we want to have, if this has to have any meaning beyond talk, then we need to, at least the four of us, because we are five of us, we are responsible for this. For the show. Then we, with your help, need at least to make definitions. It's like deqi. Is that what we said before? Is it one variable and then, needle manipulation is another variable? Or is it actually because what you get in deqi, what kind of deqi you get has very much to do with how you manipulate the needle, doesn't it? Yes? Okay. So in my opinion, no? No. Okay. Some people would say it has got nothing to do with how you manipulate the needle. No. Lots of people, also in the little bit of literature I know, they say you twiddle until you got it, isn't it? Yes. Okay. When the patient says, "I got it," then you can stop twiddling.
You can't get it without doing
No, you can't get it without, but very often when you don't get it, you twiddle until you get it.
Suppose that you hit the point.
Supposing, Volker, that you put a needle in and the person felt nothing from the needle, but then they came out in a sweat. Have you obtained deqi, or have you not obtained deqi?
That is what I'm saying. This is what I want. We have to define it, because that is what you also want. Because otherwise, we are just talking. So if you, like your concept is very useful, but still we need to define. Like the wider meaning is okay, but in terms of what we are trying to discuss here, we have to define this narrow meaning.
Okay, how about a desired response? How about deqi is a desired response?
The question of the debate has two questions it emerges, and that's part of our confusion talking about it. One is, what are we referring to? Do we mean a sensation? The other question is, do we need to feel it? And you can't talk about them as the same question, they're different. So that's why, as part of your confusion there is, what is this thing? And I think most people are agreeing there is a sensation that's feelable, but then it's a whole other question whether we have to feel something in order for it to be effective. So which question are we asking when we say deqi or not deqi? Because that will help answer it, won't it?
Yeah, I think it would, because then it would set up a whole range of possible things that we could investigate. For instance, does one have to manipulate the needle in order to get it? Or, for instance, is like the dosage effect that you're talking about? I think then we're getting somewhere, but we need to define what it is and then work with it. Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, there are a number of people who've wanted to speak. The two women here. First Joanna, and then the other lady with blonde hair. Yes.
Yes, I'm wondering, could it be interesting to take all this outside of the traditional Chinese medicine to bring it into conventional medicine, where they use also techniques of needling, but they don't have this concept of deqi or anything. They just search the nerves, and they call it. You can define it more easily. You just have to stimulate the nerve, and you can measure the effect, and you know how much you have to stimulate to get the effect. For example, if you have to get the same effect, if you want to stimulate a nerve to have an effect on the organs, you have to 30 minutes to give electricity, let's say. The same effect, if you want to have it with a needle, you have to stimulate every 5 minutes for a minute long, like giving really massage on this nerve. So I don't know if it's interesting to bring into this knowledge from conventional medicine.
But an acupuncture needle in the skin will stimulate a certain neurochemicals, neuroreceptors, nerves, no matter where you put it. No matter if you put it on bladder 62 or not bladder 62, the needle going through the skin will have a physiological effect on the body. Anywhere, at any time. Doesn't matter if you plunge it in and twist it clockwise, anti-clockwise. The actual travelling of a needle is a sensory stimulation.
Yes. But if you take it, you can define some differences in physiological effects. You have specific effects on nerves, and you have effects on cells or other tissues. So
but acupuncture will have that effect on everything.
Cut it in kind of definitions, what kind of effect you want. If I want an effect on a nerve, I can really see some muscles contracting, for example. So this is just what I want to say. Does it help? I don't know if it helps, but maybe it helps to bring us to definitions. Because otherwise it's too broad, probably.
Can I just, Mike here. Mike? Who did the MRI stuff? I can't remember. Looking at deqi and not deqi and the effect on the supraspinal hypothalamus.
Most of it was done by Kathleen Hoy.
That's right.
In Harvard. She's dead now, unfortunately. But the work goes on.
But we could definitely see that by getting deqi, you have certain profound effects on certain areas of the brain, whereas without deqi you didn't get those effects.
Well, of course that requires a definition of deqi.
Absolutely. So perhaps the definition is a physiological effect.
The problem with the systematic literature is that nobody has managed to define it.
No.
And the last conference I went to where they had a whole session on deqi, they gave up at the end saying, we don't know what we're doing.
Why did they have difficulty defining it? Because defined definitions are only agreements among groups of people about something, you know.
Yes.
So
they couldn't agree.
They couldn't get agreement, or they couldn't get consistency. Now, there's so many aspects to this, and it's fascinating discussion. But let me just tell you one little thing that's not published yet. A little bit of a side branch of a study that was done on a pain model. I don't know if you've heard of the rubber hand model in pain research. You put your hand into a tunnel and there's a rubber hand identical to yours or closely identical over a curtain, and the researchers touch you on the finger and they touch the rubber hand on the finger and they do various things until you embody that hand as your own. And they were doing various studies on this, and the girl who was involved in doing this as an MSc project had also learnt acupuncture. And she said to her boss, why don't we try sticking needles in the rubber hand? And her boss, who was a very famous pain researcher, said, no, that'll completely ruin the model. As soon as the needle goes in, that'll abolish the illusion that this is part of your body. Mm-hmm. And instead of abolishing it, 12 out of 14 of the participants describe something that we would all agree with as being a deqi type sensation. various different sensations in their body. This was a selected group of a larger group who had actually embodied that hand in the first place. So about half of the population. So what does that mean to me?
Yes.
It means deqi is
It's an internal construct, a CNS construct.
In a sense, we're wasting our time. If we generate it in a rubber hand, then we're wasting our time trying to analyse it at that level, where we're having to deal with people describing what they think they're doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the mirror neuron kind of theory, isn't it, really? That's like, it's in the creativity of the brain to be able to be fooled into thinking it's been stimulated, and even being fooled is sufficient to create a physiological response, a measurable physiological response. And that means that deqi doesn't necessarily have to involve insertion of needles even. If we have a definition of deqi that means a physiological response.
I would say that there's no point talking to people about deqi, but there would be a point in measuring some other marker. So Kathleen Hoy measured the limbic system and showed deactivation. It's okay, but not brilliant. But you can now do nerve registration, so you can measure which type of nerves you're stimulating, and the studies from the 70s did correlate effects, that they thought deqi was associated with stimulating certain types of nerves, much more likely to have analgesic effects in models. I mean, it's very limited in terms of what you're talking about clinically, but there's a sort of a sense there that a certain type of stimulus, which tends to be the more robust stimuli, tend to stimulate these sort of nerves, that tends to be associated with analgesic responses in experimental models.
deqi exists in animals. This is what we talk about. In animals, if deqi exists in animals, we don't know that, but acupuncture works in animals too.
Well, deqi does it.
In animals, we don't know. That's what we got to know.
Well, it's a physiological response, so it must...
Not physiological, no. It's just a confirmation. It's like the touch an electric wire, or you stick in a water pipe.
The rabbit makes a response.
Absolutely.
So
Trust me.
it's deqi for me.
Danny?
Just like that, just simple
what
as
Jennie's just said is the case, which I'm sure it is, that any way you put a needle, you get a physiological response. And surely we have to have as our definition of deqi some sort of subjective sensation, simply because anyone, then any needle anywhere put in by anyone, that's deqi. So again, that makes the definition of qi just massive.
Qi or deqi?
Sorry, deqi, yeah. Whereas what we're talking about is trained acupuncturists doing something other than, or beyond that with a needle.
So it's something, the intentionality has got to be included in the definition of deqi. There's got to be a specific goal that you're trying to have, as opposed to treading on a rusty nail.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I don't think there's, just one more thing, I don't think there's anything wrong with defining it in terms of subjective experience either. I don't think we have to make it, describe it in terms of the biochemistry of the local point, although that's interesting. I think there's another whole world, which is the internal experience of the patients, which is important as well.
But supposing you needle somebody and they don't feel the needling, but they come out in a sweat, just for the sake of hypothesis, then that would be a response. The person, something had happened to the patient, but it wouldn't be something that they'd felt the needle sensation from.
But those are two different questions, aren't we? We're talking about a sensation and an experience or not, and not making it contingent upon the response that's had.
But supposing the acupuncturist wanted to cause a sweat.
No, but the whole question is like
exactly. But we're not talking about.
No, okay. All right, I'll shut up.
The whole question, why it's interesting, is precisely what you say. Is in order to get the other effects, the sweating or the pulse change or the disappearance of the pain or whatever we want to get, do we need to get whatever we call deqi for that? Isn't it? That's the only interesting question. Because otherwise, that's I think is the question. Do we need to get this deqi, however it is defined, in order to get the sweating? In order to get whatever else we want to achieve.
The intended therapeutic effect.
Yeah. And otherwise,
Volker.
Like, how many minutes more do we have in this conversation?
15.
So I have a suggestion that we spend 3 minutes around each round table to discuss in a small group and see if we could come up with a definition that the small group could agree on. And then we could present.
Vote on it.
What about that?
I think it's a wonderful idea. Does anybody else think that's a wonderful idea?
Yes.
All right.
So questions?
Yes, hello.
Hi. When everyone has different responses to the needling. Some people feel cold, some people feel concentric rings going round, some feels a bit of hollowness going through this body. So you cannot, it is all different responses. Sometimes you can feel the taiji, the chi as you put it in. Sometimes you don't, but the patient feels it immediately. So how do you measure that? It's all different responses.
But that's the physiology of that particular patient at that time that you put that needle in. It's also your physiology as well.
Yeah, but
if you've had a bad day,
you're feeling the chi going in, and I'm feeling chi coming
But
out.
that's a combination of two physiologies interacting.
And it's much bigger than physiology. It's not just physiology. It's
It's
as big as you like.
that physiology.
What physiology? That one. All right, well, yes, sorry.
I'd just like to make a point about the textual analysis thing. And we're all talking about the subjective experiences of patients most of the time. And the earliest that I know things in the classics that talk about it, bearing in mind I can't actually read classical Chinese, were that it feels to the practitioner like a fish biting the rod, and in the Nanjing that it's most important that the practitioner feels deqi, the arrival of qi, and it's not about the subjective experience.
Dirty. Not in the Nanjing it's not called dirty, it's called dirty, which means the arrival of qi. Okay? Which is different. That's what I said before. Dirty is not the patient. Like you tap and you feel the twitching on the needle. Do it on
the tug.
You do it on colon 4, you always get it. Yeah? And also certain points, at least it's my experience, 99% of the time you get it somewhere in, colon 4, very easily to get this kind of fish on the hook feeling. Other points, not so often. Okay? But in the Nanjing, it's chutzi, which means the practitioner feels that you feel that the qi is coming, and when you feel that the qi is coming, then you put the needle in. But it doesn't say the patient has to feel anything. Okay? So that's a different thing, and the Japanese make a whole lot of fuss about this.
When you see the scanning tomorrow, if you're staying tomorrow, of when we're putting needles in and what happens, the fascia does grab the needle.
Yeah, I've seen the photos.
Oh, you've seen it. So there is a physiological.
Which can be measured.
Which can be measured. Very difficult, but it can be.
But not always felt.
Not always felt.
Yeah.
But feeling is something.
Yes, I might feel that, and it may be a different feeling to your physiology.
So when does the clock start for the small groups?
I have a suggestion that you form a group.
We will.
Okay.
All right.
We're going to turn the mics off.
Ready, steady, go.
Switch us back.
Hi everybody. I hope you've all felt you've had enough time, because time is running out on us now, I'm afraid. So we would love to hear what you've come up with. We should go from this table, since Holger started this ball rolling. We'll start with this table and work our way around. and then it'll come back to us at the end.
Can I ask what the question was in the first place?
Mike, you should have been listening. It was to try and define deqi.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so you're going to quickly come up with that now, are you? All right. Okay, can I start with table one?
Yeah, I think we could not agree on a definition. But we agreed on something with the use of deqi as achieving something, or we didn't get any deqi here at this table. Nothing was grabbed. Someone said grab. That's one of the definitions.
So achieving something.
Well, we did something like a sensation in the patient's body, or that the practitioner has, that some people sometimes may use to confirm effectiveness, and sometimes not. So it's a very vague
It's as good as any other, Volker.
Yeah.
Table two.
I would say we have a majority decision. That but it is definitely a link to awareness and consciousness of, and it's either patient or practitioner. So there's a little bit of a divide. Some people would say both. Some people would say preference for practitioner and preference for patient.
Can I just ask, would you say that was an intention to treat and produce a therapeutic effect? Is that the consciousness?
The awareness.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think that comes to sort of a quite important element about, certainly if you, in the Qigong practices, whether you're trying to do something or whether you're just feeling. So some people say that one's a fire method and one's a water method. So whether you're really trying to force it, it's just a different style to do it. Me personally, I would go on the water side, which is just receiving and not making to do it. But when it comes to manipulating, and once it's there, then it's a conscious thing. It's a try to do. So. But we can get on to that. So I can't speak on myself.
Thank you. Next table. Spokesperson.
I think we genuinely agreed that we were all very reassured that nobody really knew what it was.
Reassurance of ignorance of the whole group. That's it. Oh well, I suppose that's quite positive. Okay, next table.
Jasmine, we had an interesting discussion. I don't think we came to that much of a conclusion, but we did talk about there's evidence of the movement of qi with some kind of therapeutic intent. But I'd just like to add to that, I can probably achieve the same, not through acupuncture, but through a glass of wine. And we'll be doing so shortly.
Right, okay. I was writing these down.
Could I just ask if that's stagnation or movement?
Well, it's movement to start with, the stagnation comes afterwards.
Next table.
Bear in mind we didn't understand the question. We concluded that a sensation, whatever that is, was more likely to be felt through a more rigorous needling with larger diameter needle. But whether we'll try to look at the practitioner's end rather than the patient's end, which is what a student and I hear lots of. You've got to really feel the teaching, otherwise there's a pack in there type of thing. So I was really encouraged that people around the table sort of wealth of experience that this isn't the case. So we thought that perhaps with that kind of more rigorous needling and told it wasn't likely to feel it as much with more finer needling, that perhaps you're feeling the physiological effect of the muscle fibres and the fascia. And so at the end we kind of said, you asked it another question, I suppose, does a practitioner feel deqi in the way that we described at the point of needling through the needle? Or is it a case of the Yellow Emperor's U clothes?
Yes. Yes. Okay, next table.
You have the biggest ones.
No, this is the most interesting.
Well, I think we're still down to a broader concept, different level. First, applied to acupuncture, the first level is needling effects or sensation, and then broader up, go down to the treatment, and then up to the final result, how the patient was benefit from the whole thing. And if you got it, we call it deqi.
The result is only. Okay, next table.
I think we kind of probably perfectly reflected the general confusion about, we reflected in the small picture what has been happening in the big picture, and that we agreed on very little about what we were experiencing in terms of deqi. Is that fair to say? We did have one very interesting thing from somebody who isn't an acupuncturist and is here as a guest and hasn't had acupuncture, which I thought was probably the most interesting thing we heard. If you want to.
Which one?
Well, just your observation of it, because I think you're probably... Yeah.
Yes, the reason I'm here is not that I was walking past, I was invited. And I'm the chair of the Complementary and Natural Healthcare Council, so I'm here as a guest. And I find the debate absolutely fascinating. The reason I'm actually at this session is because I didn't even know how to pronounce a question, let alone what it meant. So I thought I would come and see. But my observation would be that if you're all still talking about it, you haven't yet decided whether it's something that relates to the patient, the practitioner, or both. And it's taken this long to talk about it, there probably isn't a definition.
There was another thing we picked up as well, that you succinctly put, that all of us agreed that it was reassuring as a practitioner, especially when we were inexperienced. The less experienced we were, the more reassured we were that the patient was feeling something. And as you get more experience, the less important it seems, the more confident you are.
That was my other observation.
Everyone agreed with that pretty much.
Okay. Right, Volker, would you like to? No.
I'm just a member.
No. I want you to sum it up because I'm not sure I totally agree with it. Go on.
We're not going to start
again. We could start this all over again.
We just agreed, I think, for definition's sake, we stick with the TCM textbook definition. Then we have a definition. It's what the patient feels, yes?
Yes.
But we also came to a very similar conclusion to you, that when we were young and when we were learning, it was quite important for us to get qi. And that's why it was a big issue. But at the moment for us here, it's not a real big issue anymore. We as you develop your own style, you do your own thing, as good or as bad as you can. And I think that was a consensus for us here. Therefore, as practitioners, it wasn't so important. Yeah. Okay. Because we
get on fine without it.
It's not so much you get on fine without it. It's that you learn to find your groove as a practitioner, and you work within your limitations. You work within your horizons as well, and that eventually you find your own path. And does it matter whether we have an agreed definition? It may not matter, because I think it's quite possible that as practitioners we all work very differently, and yet it's a bit like the human race. We all have two eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and we all kind of look the same, and yet we're all totally unique and totally individual, a universe unto ourselves. And in a sense, maybe it's that gets reflected in our practice, and that maybe that's the most valuable thing about it. Who knows? Right, I shall leave it there. Thank you all very much.